It's hard not to have high expectations for a game that has for so long felt like it was never gonna happen. It's been nearly 2 years now since Hideaki Itsuno, Daigo Ikino, and Kenichi Suzuki all unzipped their hoodies to reveal the words Dragon's Dogma 2 on their t-shirts in a moment that felt like a revelation at a time when all hope for a sequel was lost. Now, a lot has happened in the world of video games in the last 12 years, but honestly, the most impressive aspect of Dragon's Dogma 2 is how uncompromising it remains to its vision of what an open-world fantasy adventure should feel like. Even more so when that often stands in opposition to what we would typically expect. While it does unfortunately falter somewhat at the finish line in an experience that does feel a little abrupt, but I can confidently stand before you and preach that Dragon's Dogma 2 stands as one of the best RPGs I've played in recent years, and reignites a true feeling of adventure that is so hard to naturally capture nowadays. There was a moment in the early hours of my Dragon's Dogma 2 playthrough where I stumbled upon a cave for a side quest. Blessed with the glorious purpose of finding 2 particular items, I quickly realised that it wasn't going to be as straightforward as I'd hoped. Suddenly, this cave's simple route had sprawled out into several new paths with no clear sign of where I'd find these items. I found myself in uncharted territory, in a cave that genuinely felt endless and illuminated by just the light of a lantern attached to my waist. While most games would have had the items sat at the end point as a reward for my exploration, I instead found them both at completely different parts, and each with plenty of cave beyond to keep exploring into. It always feels like there's more than you might expect on your travels in Dragon's Dogma 2. That little tiny gremlin in your brain that just says, keep pushing a little further into the darkness, see what you can find. Which means you get a genuine sense of discovery every time you go to a new area. This fundamentally extends to the vast open world as well, as there are countless stories to find in just about every journey you take. What should be a simple jaunt to the next village over could easily turn into a quest of its own as you spot a nearby tower or a cave entrance that takes your fancy. Travelling with your pawns only adds to the experience too, as you have 3 companions to not only help you out in battle, but accompany you on the journey. Countless idle chatter, albeit sometimes repetitive, fills the air and makes every situation feel dynamic. And other pawns remarking on their original master or the past vocations of my personal pawn only further add to the feeling of a genuinely unique adventure every single time. And to be honest, my eyes can only spot so much. Having the assistance of pawns from other worlds can lead to so many new discoveries. They'll spot nearby chests, comment on certain points of interest, and even take the lead on quests that have already been completed in their original world. You could maybe argue that this is hampering the player's own sense of discovery, but it works alongside that, like you're uncovering things as a team, not just you leading a group of soulless pawns into battle. You're never more than a couple of minutes away from your next adventure in Dragon's Dogma 2. While there are plenty of sights to see as you travel through the world, you'd fundamentally miss most of them if you could just jump between points. While it was a feature within the first game, the lack of convenient fast travel in Dragon's Dogma 2 is, if you're a veteran of the series, you will not be surprised to hear, an excellent design choice that reverberates throughout almost everything that you do. Now, if you're new to Dragon's Dogma and don't feel like you should have to walk everywhere, well, let me see if I can convince you. I can't tell you the number of stories that would have been missed in our playthrough had we simply been able to jump between spots without any recourse. And it has such a foundational effect on the feeling of a true adventure as you travel. One quest required us to travel to a new city far away to the west, and doing so took actual hours on foot. Now, usually I would be at the front of the queue bemoaning this in most other games, but it felt like a breeze here, because there are so many new individual adventures cropping up along the way that you would otherwise miss if you were simply to breeze through to your destination. The act of traversal was also often a challenge in and of itself, as there are a lot of environmental hurdles that you have to clear, routes that you have to optimise, and dangers to avoid or courageously face head on. It could easily end up that your chosen path is blocked by a dragon that feels way too dangerous to even attempt, or find that the night has quickly crept up behind you with no nearby campsite to shelter within. I did wonder at the start whether having to spend so much of my time on the road would become fatiguing, but so far I've not felt boredom or repetition in the slightest, and I'm still finding new paths and sites of interest on journeys that I've travelled countless times already. But it's not all about walking. This is Dragon's Dogma 2, after all. And one of my favourite moments when adventuring through the game has been the fights with the countless mythical monsters that traverse the open world. It's hard to explain that plummeting feel of dread that you feel whenever you can hear the deafening roar of a beast encroaching upon you, or the rush of fear as its huge multi-stage health bar that you are absolutely not equipped for suddenly appears on the screen. Or that primal dread within as the shadow of a griffin flying above engulfs your character before swooping down to meet you on the ground. That these moments happen emergently and organically only elevates them. You never know how far away you are from your next big battle and always have to stay prepared and alert. It does truly feel like you're overstepping into the domain of a fearsome beast, especially when one single battle could span the space of an entire area in different stages. Much like the first game, fights in Dragon's Dogma 2 can so often feel akin to the 16 battles in Shadow of the Colossus, where you very much feel like a David against the Goliath, scaling these immeasurable titans that you have absolutely no business fighting, let alone felling. What also continues to astonish is the variety of combat styles that you can employ to tackle these behemoths. Vocations like the Archer and Sorcerer can plan their attacks from afar, yet the Thief and Warrior thrive within the chaos of the fight and more often than not find themselves holding on for dear life on the back of a monster that very much does not want them there. I personally gravitated towards the latter and managed to concoct a combination of skills that made tackling many of these beasts a lot easier. To the game's credit though, you can't simply stick to one tactic, as each major foe has its own strengths and weaknesses that you'll have to contend with and could very quickly throw your own tactics out the window. If you're looking for quick and cheap fights, this is not the game for you. Battles against these creatures often are a test of endurance, draining your health and pushing your party to the limit. It was to my absolute joy and gratitude then that I found that retreating mid-fight to rest at a nearby campsite didn't magically reset a Drake that I was fighting, and instead I was able to return and continue with a rejuvenated squad. Not that it's all sunshine, rainbows and dragon fights. Unfortunately, my biggest, and maybe only, major complaint with the game comes through the endgame and is broadly a comment on the overall narrative itself. And we aren't going to wander into the realm of spoilers here, but it felt like I had the whole game ahead of me at around the 25-hour mark, but suddenly found things to be wrapping up in a narrative that felt like it was just getting started. I don't typically have a problem with loose plots, especially in games like this where the narrative is almost told through your own exploration and adventures. But Dragon's Dogma 2, unfortunately, feels a bit too thin and leaves itself without any consistent pacing or driving force to feel the story play out. I felt like I still had so much I wanted to explore, so much of the game's wider content is entirely optional, but I quickly found myself funneled into a conclusion that I wasn't expecting and didn't really want for at least another 20 hours or so. Something that's definitely been a concern for many ahead of release is the performance, as the game occupies an odd space where its frame rate is unlocked, but largely hovers around the 30 FPS mark at the best of times. And there are no graphical modes that offer a performance alternative at the cost of graphical fidelity, so at least on PlayStation 5, where I played, you're stuck with what the game gives you. Now, I'm personally very much a frame rate person and almost always opt for the highest FPS I can get over graphics, so the prospect of playing at 30 with expected drops was a little bit daunting, but it has largely been something I've just gotten used to across the hours, and it hasn't proven to be too detrimental to my experience overall. You'll find the times where performance will suffer most is when large spells were going off or in intense lighting scenarios at night, and it does occasionally start to feel like the game is chugging a bit, even if only momentarily. Obviously, in an ideal world, this wouldn't be an issue, but it does at least feel like the performance hits are somewhat justified as the game continues to look utterly breathtaking most of the time, especially within the chaos that you and the things that you're hunting can cause. A seemingly unlimited draw distance acts as a background that is critical to the feeling of adventure. If you can see something, you can go to it, and the sheer number of actions going on at any one time during a fight definitely pushes the hardware to its limits. There will be some players who may think they won't be able to stomach the performance, which is completely understandable, but I thought I'd be in that camp too. And thankfully, I've been proven wrong. I'm not saying that I wouldn't prefer playing it at a high frame rate on a powerful PC, but it almost never got in the way of my enjoyment when playing the game. What's more is I didn't encounter a single meaningful bug in my playthrough, which is definitely something to celebrate in a game with so many moving parts and emergent encounters which, let's be honest, other games have not managed to pull off so successfully. Despite this, it is still a little frustrating that the game only gives you a single save slot to work with. I appreciate it's an ethos built into the game itself that you only have one chance on your adventure in Dragon's Dogma 2, but that save slot and one rather tenuous backup in case things go really wrong just doesn't quite feel like enough. There was only one instance in the game where I personally felt like I needed to use the backup, but it would have been great to have a number of different places to return to, especially near the end of the game. Despite my reservations about the endgame, which honestly has left me feeling a little shortchanged, Dragon's Dogma 2 remains an exceptional experience on almost every front and an adventure that you unequivocally do not want to miss. There is so much to find within this world, and the game gives you the perfect tools to stumble upon it all naturally. From never-ending caves to gargantuan mythical beasts, you really do never know what wonders will lie around every corner. Sure, it's a little rough around the edges, with the performance perhaps at the forefront of that, but I'd almost always rather play a game that feels like it's pushing the boundaries with its own carved identity than one that doesn't challenge my own expectations and experience. Here at GG Recon, we gave Dragon's Dogma 2 a 4.5 out of 5. Thank you so much for watching. Will you be picking up Dragon's Dogma 2? Have we convinced you it's worth a play? Let us know your thoughts down in the comments and stick with us at GG Recon because we have plenty of Dragon's Dogma 2 guides and more coming up. And while you're here with us, YouTube has selected the perfect video just for you to watch next, so check that out here.